The nameplate was bronze, small, bolted to the door at eye level the way they always are in federal buildings. No flourish, no ceremony. Just a name and a rank pressed into metal and left there to mean whatever it means to whoever reads it. I was walking past when I heard him stop. I knew the sound of Marcus Reed going still. 12 years, and a body doesn't forget. He stood in that hallway with his briefcase in one hand and his whole careful life in the other, staring at 3 words he never expected to see. I kept walking. Before I tell you what happened next, if you're watching this right now, drop your country and your local time in the comments. I read every single one. It helps me know who's out there listening. A few hours earlier, I was sitting in my car in the parking garage on 5th Street, eating half a granola bar over my steering wheel and trying to remember if I'd turned off the coffee pot. I hadn't. I never do on Tuesdays. That's the thing nobody tells you about the kind of work I do. The mornings are relentlessly ordinary. You wake up, you check your phone, you feed the cat if you have one, you forget the coffee pot, and then you drive yourself to a place where the decisions you make will follow someone else for the rest of their life. And somewhere between the granola bar and the parking garage elevator, you have to find the switch inside yourself and turn it. I've been flipping that switch for 23 years. My name is Shelby Washington. I am 48 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Clarksville, Maryland, 12 minutes from the federal courthouse on a good traffic day and 27 on a bad one. My neighbor Patrice thinks I process benefits claims for a government agency. My college roommate, when she tracked me down on Facebook 4 years ago, told her husband I work in administration. My own daughter, until very recently, described my job at her school orientation as something legal, I think, for the Army. None of them were entirely wrong. I just never corrected the details. It's easier that way, not because I'm ashamed. I want to be clear about that. It's because explaining what I actually do requires explaining why I do it. And that story has edges on it that can cut people who aren't expecting them. So I learned a long time ago to carry it quietly, to let people fill in the blank with something manageable, something that didn't require them to look at me differently at the next block party or the next Christmas card exchange. I work for the government. I do paperwork. I drive a sensible car. That morning in the parking garage, my phone buzzed. Danny, she calls me every Tuesday before my first hearing, a habit she started last spring without ever announcing it. She just started calling and kept calling, and I learned to answer before I got out of the car, because once I'm inside the building, I silence everything. Morning, Mom. Morning, baby. You eat something? Granola bar. She made a sound that was exactly the sound her grandmother used to make when she disapproved of something, but had decided not to fight about it. She's 19. She makes that sound with a precision that impresses and unsettles me in equal measure. Mom, it had oats in it. I'm looking at the JAG Corps website again, she said. I went quiet for a second. I do that when I need to think carefully about which version of an answer to give. It's a habit from work that I have not successfully kept at work. Why? I asked. Because I'm applying to law school in 8 months, and I keep thinking about what you said last year, about how the law either serves power or checks it, and that the difference comes down to who's willing to sign their name to something hard. I remembered saying that. It was Thanksgiving. She'd asked me something offhand about my job, the way kids do when they're probing, but don't want to seem like they're probing. And for some reason that night, maybe because it was late and the wine was almost gone, and I was tired of carrying the quiet, I said a real thing instead of the manageable thing. She'd written it down. I found out later she'd actually written it down. There's more than one way to practice law, Danny, I know. But I keep coming back to it. She paused. Mom, what do you actually do? Like, specifically? The elevator doors opened. A court security officer I've known for 9 years nodded at me from behind his desk. I held up one finger and turned toward the corner. I'll tell you more when you come visit next month, I said. I promise. She let that sit for a moment. Danny has always known when I'm deferring instead of refusing. She inherited that from me too, the ability to hear the shape of what isn't being said. "Okay," she said finally. "Be good today." "I'm always good. Be better than good then." I smiled. I don't smile easily in the mornings, but she gets one every time. I clipped my badge to my jacket, tucked my files under my arm, and walked into the building that has had my name on a door for the past 4 years. The building where I have stood at a prosecution table in full uniform and delivered verdicts that changed the trajectory of the United States Army. The building where, 11 years ago, I made the hardest decision of my professional life in a room the size of a closet, alone at 11 o'clock at night, with a pen in my hand and a document I refused to sign. The building where, in approximately 3 hours, a man named Marcus Reed would walk through the main entrance with a leather briefcase and a client he intended to protect, and find himself standing in a hallway he had never expected to stand in. He would look at the door. He would read the nameplate, and 12 years of careful silence would end in a federal corridor that smelled like floor wax and recycled air. But that morning, I didn't know he was coming. I hadn't known for 12 years. I had put Marcus Reed in the same place I put everything that couldn't be carried forward. Sealed, labeled, set on a shelf in the back of the mind where the light doesn't quite reach. I had work to do. I always had work to do. I pushed through the door to the JAG offices, set my files on my desk, and pulled up the morning's docket. Captain Polk was already at his desk across the room, highlighter in hand, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. "Morning, Colonel. Morning, Jerome. You eat? Vending machine. Outstanding," he grinned. I didn't. I sat down, put on my reading glasses, and began. I saw him before he saw me see. That's important. I want you to understand that. Because for a long time, for years, if I'm being honest, I used to imagine the moment differently. I used to think if Marcus Reed ever walked back into my life, I would be the one caught off guard. I would be the one with nowhere to put my hands, no script, no preparation. I used to think he would always have the advantage simply because he was the one who chose to leave, but that's not how it happened. I was coming out of the records annex on the second floor, files pressed to my chest, reading a motion summary on the top page when I heard the elevator open at the end of the hall. I glanced up the way you do in a building where you know most of the faces, just a reflex, a half-second scan, and there he was. He hadn't changed as much as I expected. That was the first thing. The hair at his temples had gone silver, and he'd put on weight in the way that successful men in their 50s often do. Not sloppy, but settled, like a man who has decided he's earned the right to take up more space. He was wearing a charcoal suit I didn't recognize, carrying a leather briefcase that looked expensive in the particular way that lawyers who bill $400 an hour carry expensive things. Without thinking about it, he was looking down at his phone. I had approximately 4 seconds. I used them to take one slow breath, shift my files to my left arm, and continue walking at exactly the pace I'd been walking before. He looked up when I was 8 feet away. I watched it happen in stages. First, the automatic social recognition, a face he knew, a person from somewhere. Then the recalibration, then the name arriving, and then, behind his eyes, something I can only describe as a man rapidly trying to solve a math problem he didn't expect to be asked. "Shelby?" He said it the way you say the name of a city you used to live in, like a landmark he hadn't thought about in years, but could still locate on a map. "Marcus," I said one word. Flat. Not cold. I want to be precise about that. Not cold, not warm. The tone you use when you are in a professional building and someone has said your name, and basic courtesy requires a response. He smiled. It was the smile I remembered. The one that had always worked on rooms, on juries, on people who needed to be reassured that Marcus Reed was a reasonable man. It appeared quickly and sat on his face with the ease of long practice. "I didn't know you were," he gestured vaguely at the hallway. "Are you working here?" "Yes," I said. "Doing what?" I looked at him for a moment. In 23 years of legal practice, I have learned that silence deployed at the right moment is more precise than almost any sentence. I let the silence sit for exactly 2 beats. Government work, I said. Something flickered across his face. Amusement, maybe. Or the older thing, the familiar assumption, the one I'd watched him construct across the last 4 years of our marriage, like a man slowly building a wall he pretended wasn't there. The assumption that Shelby Washington was capable and determined and probably always would be, but that capable and determined had a ceiling, and Marcus Reed had a reasonable sense of where that ceiling was. Good for you, he said, and he meant it. That was the thing that would stay with me later. He genuinely meant it. It was sincere condescension, which is somehow worse than the cynical kind. Are you here for a filing? I asked. Client matter. He shifted the briefcase to his other hand, and I noticed the gesture, the unconscious repositioning of something valuable when the conversation turns professional. Federal case, bit complicated. I'm actually trying to find out who's running the prosecution side. My assistant couldn't get a straight answer out of the clerk's office. He paused. You wouldn't happen to know who to talk to? I looked at him. There are moments in a life that you do not fully understand while you are inside them. You register the surface, the words, the expression, the particular quality of light in a hallway on a Tuesday morning. But the deeper meaning arrives later, after you've had time to sit with it. After you've driven home and changed out of your jacket and stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water, just breathing. This was one of those moments. He was asking me to help him find me. You could check with the clerk's office on the first floor, I said. Room 104. They should have the full assignment on file. Right, he nodded, looked down at his phone again briefly, then back up. It's good to see you, Shelby. Really, you look well. I have been told I look well many times in my life. I have never once found it a useful piece of information. You too, Marcus, I said. I walked past him. I made it to the stairwell door, pushed through it, and stood on the landing for exactly 11 seconds. I know because I counted. It is a technique I learned from a trauma counselor at Fort Bragg in 2009, offered to me after a particularly difficult deployment rotation, and I have used it approximately 3,000 times since. 1, 2, 3. The feeling you experience when the past walks into your present is not the dramatic thing people describe in movies. It is not a wave. It is more like suddenly noticing that a piece of furniture you stopped seeing years ago is still in the room, exactly where you left it, and you've been walking around it so long you forgot it was there. 7, 8, 9. I had a hearing in 40 minutes. 10, 11. I straightened my files, pushed my shoulders back, and walked down the stairs. The hearing that morning was a sentencing review, a staff sergeant from Fort Meade. 26 years old, 2 tours in Afghanistan, had been convicted 8 months prior on charges of conduct unbecoming and unauthorized use of government property. The details were not glamorous. They rarely are. People imagine military law as a theater of high drama, courts-martial with generals in dress blues, classified evidence, international stakes. Sometimes it is those things. More often, it is a young person who made a series of small, incremental decisions that each seemed survivable in the moment, and then one morning found themselves sitting across a prosecution table from someone like me. I do not enjoy that part of the work. I want to be honest about that. I do it because someone has to do it carefully, because the alternative, doing it carelessly, or not doing it at all, causes a different kind of damage, the kind that spreads through an institution the way water moves through a foundation crack. Slowly, invisibly, and then all at once. I presented the government's position in 41 minutes. Captain Polk had the supplementary exhibits organized in the order I needed them before I asked. The defense counsel, a lieutenant I'd seen in this building a dozen times, was thorough and composed and did the best she could with what she had. The judge, Colonel Margaret Ferris, who has been on this bench for 7 years and has eyes that miss nothing, issued a modified sentence with a written explanation I could tell she'd already drafted before we walked in. It was not a morning that would make the news. It would not appear in any record a civilian would ever read. But somewhere, A staff sergeant's future had just been given a slightly different shape, and the people in that room had been the ones holding the instrument. I collected my files, exchanged a nod with Colonel Ferris, and walked back out into the hallway. Marcus was still there, not in the same spot. He'd moved down toward the far end of the corridor, near the water fountain, phone pressed to his ear. He had his back to me. I could hear the low murmur of his voice without making out the words, the particular cadence of a man managing a situation, reassuring someone on the other end of the line that things were under control. I should have turned left and gone back to my office. I turned left and went back to my office. Linda Chow was at the front desk when I came through the door. Linda has been the administrative coordinator for this division for 11 years, which means she was here before I was, which means she has seen 3 different prosecutors occupy the office with my name on it, which means she has a longer institutional memory than almost anyone else in this building, and she uses it with the discretion of someone who understands exactly how much a well-kept silence is worth. She looked up when I came in. Then she looked at me with the particular attention she reserves for moments when something has shifted in the atmosphere. "You have a message," she said. "Gentleman at the front desk about an hour ago said he was trying to identify the lead prosecutor on the Hartley matter." She paused. "Left a card." She held it out. I took it. Marcus Reed, Callaway and Associates. The address was a K Street suite I recognized. Good location. The kind of address that costs what it costs, because the first thing opposing counsel does is look up where you work. I turned the card over. Nothing on the back. "Did he say anything else?" I asked. "He said he was an old acquaintance of yours." Linda's voice was perfectly neutral. It has always been perfectly neutral in the 11 years I have known her, and I have come to understand that her neutrality is not indifference. It is professionalism of the highest order, which is its own form of loyalty. "I didn't confirm or deny anything about your caseload." "Thank you, Linda. You want me to pull the Hartley assignment sheet?" "Please." I went into my office and sat down and placed Marcus Reed's business card in the center of my desk and looked at it for a moment, the way you look at something you need to think about before you decide what to do with it. The Hartley matter. I knew the case? Of course I knew the case. It was mine. A defense contractor mid-level accused of fraudulent billing on a federal military procurement contract. Not glamorous. Not front page. Exactly the kind of case that looks like paperwork until you pull the thread and find out how far back it goes and whose signatures are on which documents. Marcus Reed was representing the defense. I sat with that for a moment. In 23 years, I have learned that coincidence is real, that the world is smaller than it looks, and that the correct response to an unexpected variable is not alarm but assessment. I picked up a pen. I set it down. Captain Polk knocked on the open door. He was holding a folder and reading something in it, glasses still pushed up on his forehead. Colonel Hayes is in the building." I looked up. Raymond Hayes. Retired. 74 years old. He came through the JAG offices 3 or 4 times a year, technically as a consultant, practically because he had spent 40 years in this institution and could not fully convince himself to leave it alone. He was the kind of man who had forgotten more about military law than most people would ever learn, and he carried that knowledge the way old soldiers carry old injuries. Present in every movement, never mentioned. He had been there 12 years ago. He had been in the building the night I made my decision. He was one of 2 people alive who knew exactly what that decision had cost me and why I had made it anyway. "Send him in," I said. I put Marcus Reed's business card in my desk drawer. A few minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of Raymond Hayes moving down the hallway, unhurried, deliberate, the walk of a man who had long ago stopped trying to arrive anywhere quickly and had started simply arriving. He appeared in my doorway. He looked at me. Then he looked at the drawer where I'd put the card, with an accuracy that was either coincidence or the particular perception of someone who has spent a lifetime reading rooms. "Shelby," he said. "Raymond," I said. "Sit down." He sat. He folded his hands on his knee. He waited. Outside in the hallway, I heard the elevator open. Raymond Hayes has a way of sitting in a room that makes the room feel like it's been waiting for him. He doesn't take up a lot of space physically. He's compact, white-haired, the kind of lean that comes from decades of discipline rather than intention. But there is a quality to his stillness that I have never been able to fully describe. It is the stillness of someone who has seen enough of the world's noise to have stopped being impressed by it. He looked at me the way he always looks at me, like he is checking a reading on an instrument he trusts but monitors anyway. "You look tired," he said. "I had a sentencing review this morning." "That's not why you look tired." I didn't answer that. I pulled the Hartley assignment sheet Linda had left on my desk and turned it to face him. He leaned forward, read it without picking it up, leaned back. "Defense counsels," he said. "As of this morning, apparently." He was quiet for a moment. Raymond Hayes is one of the few people I have ever met who treats silence as a working tool rather than an awkward gap to be filled. He used it now the way a craftsman uses a level. Measuring, checking, making sure everything was still plumb. "Did you speak to him?" "Briefly. In the hallway. He didn't know who I was in the context of this building. He asked me if I knew who to talk to about the prosecution assignment." The corner of Raymond's mouth moved. It was not quite a smile. It was the expression of a man who has watched enough irony accumulate over a long career to recognize it on sight without being surprised by it. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to check with the clerk's office." This time he did smile. "Brief, the kind that arrives and departs without making a fuss." We sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "How's Danny?" 19. Considering law school. "Asking better questions than I'm ready to answer. That's how you know you raised her right." Outside my office, I could hear the building doing what buildings do in the middle of a Tuesday. Footsteps. A door closing somewhere down the hall. The muffled sound of someone on a phone. The particular white noise of institutional life moving at its ordinary pace. I had worked in this building long enough that I stopped hearing most of it. But I was hearing it now, the way you hear weather when you know something is coming. "He's going to find out," I said. "Not a question?" "Yes," Raymond said. "He is. When he goes to room 104 and reads the assignment sheet, or when he comes back up here and Linda hands him the standard opposing counsel notification. Whichever comes first." I paused. "Probably within the hour." Raymond nodded slowly. "How do you want to handle it?" he asked. I looked at the window. My office faces the interior courtyard. Not much of a view, just a rectangle of sky between two wings of the building, but I have spent a considerable number of difficult moments looking at that rectangle and finding it useful. "The same way I handle everything," I said. "By the book." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Shelby," in the tone he uses when he thinks I am being precise in a way that sidesteps the actual question. "I know," I said. I did know. He wasn't asking about procedure. He was asking about the other thing, the 12-year-old thing, the thing that lived in the back of the building, in my mind where the light doesn't reach. He was asking if I was all right, in the way that men of his generation ask that question, which is by not asking it directly and trusting you to hear it anyway. "I'm fine, Raymond. You will be," he said, which is a different thing, and we both knew it. He stood, straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who spent 4 decades in uniform, and moved toward the door. Then he stopped. "I'm going to take a walk down the hall," he said. "Get some water." I understood. He left. I sat at my desk for approximately 4 minutes. I reviewed 2 pages of the Hartley brief. I did not retain anything on either page. I put them down, then I heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in the air pressure of the hallway outside. The specific quality of a pause that doesn't belong in the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday morning. I stood up. I walked to my office door and opened it. Marcus was standing in the hallway outside the JAG suite, maybe 15 feet away. He was holding a printed sheet of paper, the assignment notification. I recognized the format, and he was looking at the door to my office, at the nameplate, LTC Shelby M. Washington JAG. He was very still. Behind him, Raymond Hayes stood near the water fountain with a paper cup he wasn't drinking from. He was watching Marcus the way a man watches a weather system move across a plain from a very long distance, with attention, without urgency. Marcus looked up from the nameplate. He found my face. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The hallway held us in it the way a photograph holds a moment, fixed, lit from one direction, unable to move forward or back. Then Marcus looked down at the paper in his hand, back up at the nameplate. Back at me, I watched him do the arithmetic. I watched the pieces arrive and arrange themselves into a shape he had not anticipated and could not immediately manage. The woman in the hallway this morning, the government work, the building, the door, the name, Shelby. His voice was different now. The smoothness was still there. Marcus Reed had spent 30 years cultivating a voice that did not reveal its owner's interior weather, but underneath it, something had shifted, a structural thing. Like a floor that has just discovered it is standing above something it didn't know was there. That was when Raymond Hayes walked forward. He stopped beside me in the doorway. He looked at Marcus Reed with the calm, unhurried clarity of a 74-year-old man who has nothing left to prove and knows it. He extended his hand. "Colonel Washington," he said. Not to Marcus, to me. Deliberate, clear, the words placed with the care of someone who understands that some sentences do more than communicate. I shook his hand. Down the hall, 2 junior officers who had just come out of the copy room stopped walking and stood where they were, reading the hallway the way young people in institutions learn to read hallways, watching the seniors, measuring the weight of what was happening, filing it away. Marcus Reed stood in the middle of all of it. He looked like a man who had just realized that the room he'd walked into was much larger than the door had suggested. I want to tell you about a night in November 12 years ago. Not because it explains everything. It doesn't. But because there are moments in a life that function like load-bearing walls. Invisible from the outside, unremarkable to look at. But take them out and the whole structure comes down. That night was one of those moments for me. And if you're going to understand who I am when I'm standing in that hallway with Raymond Hayes beside me and Marcus Reed in front of me, you need to understand what happened in a windowless room at Fort Belvoir on a Tuesday night when it was 31 degrees outside, and I was 36 years old and I had a pen in my hand. His name was Colonel Gerald Patton. He had 28 years of service, a Bronze Star, a photograph with a former Secretary of Defense on his office wall, and 4 soldiers who had filed formal complaints against him over a period of 14 months. The complaints described a pattern of targeted harassment, deliberate sabotage of performance reviews, and in one case, a specialist named Aurelio Vega, 22 years old, from Laredo, Texas, what amounted to a sustained campaign of psychological pressure that had resulted in a medical discharge and a diagnosis that Aurelio's family was still trying to understand when I first read his file. The case had been assigned to me 6 months prior. I had built it the way I build everything, slowly, carefully, following the thread wherever it went, not deciding the destination before I knew the map. By October, I had enough. By early November, I had more than enough. On the 14th of November, at 8:40 in the morning, I received a call from a brigadier general I will not name here. He told me the Patton matter was drawing attention at levels I needed to be aware of. He used the word sensitive twice. He told me that a prosecution of this nature, given Patton's record and his relationships within the command structure, would require extraordinary justification to proceed. He told me that a request had come from above. His word, above, to review whether the evidence threshold had truly been met. I told him I believed it had. There was a pause. He told me that a document would be placed on my desk for review, that the document was a formal of prosecution request prepared by the Office of the Staff Judge Advocate, that my signature was needed by end of business Thursday. He told me this was a conversation that did not need to go further than the 2 of us. I thanked him for calling. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time. I had been in the Army for 14 years at that point. I had deployed twice. I had seen the institution at its finest. In the field, under pressure, when the people around you become the clearest version of themselves because there is no margin left for anything else. I had also seen the institution protect itself, the way all large institutions protect themselves, with the same structural instinct that causes a body to wall off an infection rather than expel it. I was not naive. I had never been naive. But I had believed, I want to be precise here, because it matters. I had believed that the law was the part of the institution that was supposed to resist that instinct, that the JAG Corps existed precisely because someone, a long time ago, had understood that an army without legal accountability was not an army. It was something else. I believed that. I still believe it. On the night of the 19th, 6 days after the phone call, I was in the office until past 11. Everyone else had gone home. The building had that particular quality that large buildings get late at night, not silent exactly, but emptied out like a theater after the audience has left. The document was on my desk. It had been on my desk for 6 days. I had read it 4 times. I had called my mentor, a retired colonel in Virginia, and talked around it without saying it directly, and he had listened and then said, "You already know what you're going to do, Shelby. You're just waiting to be ready to do it." He was right. I picked up the pen. I wrote, in the signature block, in my own handwriting, "Reviewed and declined to execute. SFC proceeding as filed." I initialed it, I dated it, I put it in my outbox. Then I sat there for a while in the quiet building and thought about Aurelio Vega from Laredo, Texas, and the 22 other soldiers in 7 years of case files, who had needed someone to sign their name to something hard and found that the person assigned to do it had decided the cost was too high. I thought about what it felt like to be the one who decided the cost was not too high. It felt like a lot of things. It felt like standing on a surface you weren't sure would hold your weight and discovering, with your whole body, that it did. What happened next came quickly and without drama, the way institutional punishment usually does. My transfer orders arrived 10 days later. I was reassigned to a posting that was technically a lateral move and functionally a burial, a logistics review unit in Georgia. Meaningful work in the abstract, meaningless in the context of everything I had been building. The patent prosecution was reassigned. It was resolved 6 months later through an administrative process that resulted in his early retirement with full benefits and a letter of commendation for his service. Aurelio Vega sent me a card. He had found my name somehow. He wrote 3 sentences. I have kept the card. At home, Marcus had watched the transfer orders arrive with the expression of a man whose private calculations had just been confirmed. He had been patient for years. He had told me, more than once, that he supported my career, that he understood the demands, that he was proud of me, and I believe that he had meant those things when he said them. But there is a difference between supporting a version of someone and supporting the actual person. And Marcus Reed, I came to understand, had been in love with a version of me that made choices he could anticipate. The night I told him what I had done, not everything, not the names, but the shape of it, he sat across from me at our kitchen table and looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "You burned it down, Shelby. I told you. You burned the whole thing down." I looked at him. "No," I said, "I didn't." 3 months later, he filed for divorce. There are things I have never told Danny, not because I wanted to protect her from the truth. She is 19 years old and sharper than most adults I have worked with, and she does not need protecting from truth. I kept them from her because she was 7 when Marcus and I divorced, and then she was 10, and then she was 13, and there is never a right moment to sit a child down and explain that the story she has been living inside is more complicated than she knew, that the walls of it have rooms behind them, that some of the people she loves made choices she didn't see. So she grew up with the version of the story that children grow up with when their parents divorce without cruelty and without explanation, that her mother and father had wanted different things, that they were better apart, that both of them loved her completely, and that was the part that mattered. That version was true. It was just not complete. Here is what Danny did not know. In the fall of the year, I refused to sign the withdrawal document. 3 weeks before my transfer orders arrived, Marcus came home one evening and told me he'd had lunch with a colleague, a defense attorney he'd met at a conference the previous spring. They'd discussed some mutual professional interests. I didn't think about it at the time. Marcus had lunch with colleagues regularly. He moved in wide professional circles, collected contacts the way some people collect books, not always to use them, but because the accumulation itself meant something to him. What I know now, and did not know then, I learned 4 years ago from a source I will not identify, except to say that they had access to billing records that had become relevant in an unrelated proceeding. The colleague Marcus had lunch with that fall was a partner at a firm that had been quietly retained to monitor the patent case, not to intervene directly, that would have been too visible, but to track its progress, to identify pressure points, and if possible to make contact with people in the orbit of the prosecution who might be receptive to a conversation. Marcus was not a target. He was an approach vector. I do not know exactly what was said over that lunch. I do not know if Marcus understood fully what he was being asked to participate in, or if it was framed in the careful language that these things are usually framed in, as professional networking, as mutual interest, as the kind of informal information sharing that happens constantly in legal circles and exists in a gray space that everyone pretends is not a gray space. What I know is this. In the weeks that followed that lunch, Marcus began asking me questions about my work that he had never asked before. Not dramatically, not in a way that felt like interrogation, in the way that a person who has been given a specific piece of information to look for asks questions, casually embedded in ordinary conversation, easy to miss if you are not already suspicious. I was not suspicious. I was tired and preoccupied, and I trusted him. That was the simple fact of it. I trusted him, and I answered his questions, and I did not connect those answers to anything until it was too late to matter. When I received the phone call from the Brigadier General, when the withdrawal document appeared on my desk, when the specific framing of the request matched too precisely the specific vulnerabilities in my case file that only someone with inside knowledge could have identified, I began to understand. I did not confront Marcus with it. I want to be honest about why. It was not because I lacked the evidence or the words or the courage. It was because I was 36 years old, and I was looking at the architecture of my marriage and seeing for the first time which parts of it had been built on something solid and which parts had been built on assumption. And I needed a moment, just a moment, before I was ready to stand inside that knowledge. By the time I had signed the document and received my transfer orders and sat across from him at the kitchen table, I had decided not to tell him that I knew. Not then, not in that moment. Because here is the thing about confronting someone with a betrayal. The confrontation becomes the story. It becomes the thing you both carry forward. The accusation, the denial or the admission, the debris of it. And I did not want the rest of my life, or the rest of Danny's life, to be organized around the debris of Marcus Reed, so I let him leave. I let him file the papers and tell Danny whatever version he needed to tell her and move into the apartment in Bethesda and eventually into the house in McLean with the woman he married 2 years later. I let him have the narrative he had constructed that Shelby Washington had been too devoted to a career that destroyed everything it touched, that she had chosen her principles over her family, that he had simply been a man who could not watch that happen anymore. I let him have it, not because he deserved it, but because Danny deserved a father who was not defined in her childhood by what her mother knew about him. I have thought about that decision many times in the years since. I have questioned it. I have defended it. I have sat with it in the particular way that you sit with the irreversible choices of your life. Not with regret exactly, but with the steady awareness that you made a choice, and the choice made you, and here you are, standing in a federal courthouse hallway at 48, looking at the man himself. What I felt in that hallway was not anger. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been cleaner. Anger has a direction to it. What I felt was older and more complicated, the specific weight of 12 years of knowing something you cannot say, meeting the moment when the saying of it becomes possible. Raymond was beside me. Marcus was still holding the assignment sheet. Down the hall, Captain Polk had appeared in the doorway of the copy room and was reading the situation with the focused attention of a young officer learning, in real time, what it looks like when history walks into the present tense. Marcus looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us spoke yet, because we were both standing at the edge of a conversation that had been 12 years in the arriving, and some conversations require a breath before you can begin them. The hearing was scheduled for 2 o'clock. I want you to understand what that meant in practical terms. It meant that whatever was going to happen in that hallway had approximately 4 hours to happen, and then regardless of what had or had not been resolved, between two people who used to share a last name and a kitchen table and a daughter, I would walk into courtroom 4, stand at the prosecution table, and do my job. That is not compartmentalization in the clinical sense. It is something simpler and older than that. It is the understanding, learned over 23 years, that the work does not wait for the person. The person waits for nothing. You bring yourself to the work whole, or as close to whole as you can manage on a given day, and you do what is required, and afterward you attend to whatever is left. I looked at Marcus and said, "We should speak in my office." He nodded. He looked like a man who had just walked into a building expecting one thing and discovered the entire floor plan was different, not panicked. Marcus Reed did not panic. It was genuinely one of his better qualities, but recalibrated. Processing, Raymond Hayes excused himself with a nod that communicated everything it needed to communicate. "I am here. I am not going anywhere. You know where to find me." Marcus followed me into my office. I closed the door. I did not offer him a seat immediately. I went to my desk, set down the files I was still carrying, and stood behind my chair for a moment. Then I sat. And I gestured to the chair across from me, and he sat in it. And for a moment we were just two people in a room with a window that faced a rectangle of November sky. He looked around the office, at the shelves, at the framed commission on the wall, at the photographs, one of Danny at her high school graduation, one of my unit from the deployment in 2007, one of a group of JAG prosecutors at a conference 3 years ago, myself in the center in dress blues, Lieutenant Colonel's oak leaves on my shoulder. He looked at that photograph for a long time. "How long?" he said. "At this posting, 4 years. In the JAG Corps, 23. He absorbed that. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't." He was quiet for a moment. Then, when we were married, the transfers, I thought it was policy work, administrative. "You never said." "No," I said. "I didn't." He looked at me with something I hadn't expected, which was not defensiveness, but something closer to genuine bewilderment. Marcus Reed had always been an intelligent man. It was one of the first things I had loved about him, the quality of his attention, the way he could hold a complex problem from multiple angles without needing to resolve it prematurely. That intelligence was present now, and it was working, and I could see it working, which meant I could see the moment when it arrived at the question he did not want to ask. He asked it anyway, Shelby. "The patent case." The room was very quiet. "What about it?" I said. Not a question, a measurement. He leaned forward, put his elbows on his knees, looked at the floor between us. This was a posture I recognized. It was the posture Marcus adopted when he was about to say something true, as opposed to something tactical. In 30 years of legal practice, he had built a formidable capacity for the tactical, but underneath it there had always been this, a man who, when the tactics ran out, defaulted to honesty. It was the thing I had respected most about him. It was also the thing that had made his choices 12 years ago so difficult to understand. I didn't know what they were going to do with it, he said. When Hargrove asked me to lunch, I thought it was a networking conversation. He asked me about you, about your work. I told him you were thorough, that you were the kind of attorney who didn't stop once she started. He paused. I didn't know he was going to use it. You suspected, I said. He was quiet, Marcus. You suspected. Yes. The word came out flat and unadorned. After the second conversation, when he started asking more specific questions, Yes. I suspected something was being built, and I told myself it was above my level to understand, that it was institutional, that these things happened and people much more powerful than me were the ones making decisions, and I was just... He stopped. A lunch, I said. He looked up at me. You were just a lunch, I said. That's what you told yourself. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I thought about what it had cost me to leave that sentence unsaid for 12 years. The weight of it. How many Tuesday mornings I had driven to this building carrying that weight, as though it were simply the weather. Present, inevitable, not worth remarking on. I'm not going to relitigate my marriage in my office, I said. That's not what this is. What this is, Marcus, is a federal proceeding in which we're opposing counsel and I am lead prosecutor, and those are the only roles that exist between us in this building from this point forward. Is that clear? He straightened. The lawyer in him recognized the register I was using and responded to it the way lawyers respond to formal clarity, with attention, with the adjustment of posture. That means I am operating in professional mode now. Yes, he said. You'll receive all standard opposing counsel communications through Captain Polk. Any procedural questions go through him. If there is a conflict of interest you believe requires disclosure, you have 48 hours to file a motion. I will recuse myself from evaluating that motion. There's no conflict, he said. That's your determination to make, and the court's to evaluate, he nodded. He stood. He picked up his briefcase from where he'd set it beside the chair. He looked at the photograph on the wall one more time. The one with the dress blues, the oak leaves, the woman in the center who had been standing in this building for 4 years while he had not known she existed here. At the door he stopped. Danny, he said. Does she know? I looked at him steadily. She's about to, I said. He left. I sat in my office for 6 minutes. I looked at the rectangle of sky. I flipped the switch. At 2 o'clock, I walked into courtroom 4. Donnie called me at 6:47 that evening. I was still in the building. The hearing had run long, not unusually long, but the kind of long that happens when the details of a case are more layered than the initial filings suggest, which in the Hartley matter they were. Marcus had been composed throughout. Professional, prepared, precise in his objections. Whatever had happened in my office that morning had been folded away by 2 o'clock with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent 30 years learning to separate his interior weather from his courtroom bearing. I had noted that. I had noted it without feeling anything in particular about it, which is its own kind of feeling. I was packing my files when the phone rang. Danny's name on the screen, I answered. Mom? Hey, baby? Dad called me. I set the files down. I sat on the edge of my desk. Okay, I said. He told me you were at the same courthouse, that he's on a case you're prosecuting. A pause. He didn't say much else. She stopped. He sounded like he was trying to figure out how to say something and couldn't find the right way. That's fair, I said. Mom, her voice had changed. It had the quality it gets when she is not asking a question but clearing the ground for one. What do you actually do? I looked at the photograph on my wall. The one with the dress blues, the oak leaves, the 23 years. I prosecute cases on behalf of the United States Army, I said, in federal and military courts. I have been doing it for 23 years. My current rank is lieutenant colonel. The silence on her end was not the silence of surprise exactly. It was the silence of someone rearranging a room they thought they knew, moving the furniture to its actual positions rather than the positions they had assumed. The government paperwork, she said finally. That was easier to explain at school pickup. Mom, a breath. Mom, I know. Why didn't you? She stopped. Start it again. I'm not angry. I need you to know I'm not angry. You needed to know who you were telling people your mother was. Yes, quietly. Yes, I thought for a moment about how to say the next thing. I have drafted legal arguments in the middle of the night, under pressure, with careers and freedom and institutional integrity at stake. I have never found any of it as difficult as finding the right words for my daughter. I kept it quiet because the work is serious in ways that are hard to explain casually, I said. And because when you were small, I didn't want the weight of it to be something you carried. And because, I paused, because there were things about why I do this work that I wasn't ready to talk about until you were old enough to hold them. And I kept pushing back when old enough was. I'm old enough now, she said. I know you are. Tell me, she said. Tell me the actual reason. Not the practical one. I looked at the rectangle of sky. It was dark now, the courtyard lights on below, the window giving back a faint reflection of my office instead of the outside. There was a soldier, I said. His name was Aurelio Vega. He was 22 years old, and he was from Laredo, Texas, and he needed someone to sign their name to something hard, and I signed it, and it cost me things I loved, and I would sign it again tomorrow, and the day after that I stopped. That's the actual reason. She was quiet for a long time, then she said, I want to come this weekend. Can I come this weekend? Yes, I said. You can come this weekend. She came on Saturday. She arrived at 9 in the morning with a duffel bag and 2 coffees from the place on Route 108 that she knows I like but won't admit I like because I've told her the drive is too far. She set the coffee on my kitchen counter and looked at me, and then she put her arms around me and held on in the way she hasn't held on since she was small, and I let her, and neither of us said anything for a while. Later that afternoon, she asked me if she could come to the courthouse on Monday. Not to observe the hearing, she understood that wasn't possible. But just to see the building, to see the door, I said yes. We drove over at 4 o'clock, when the building was quieter. I badged us in through the side entrance. We walked down the main corridor, past the clerk's office, past the records annex, up to the 2nd floor. We stopped outside my office. She read the nameplate, LTC Shelby M. Washington, JAG. She stood there for a moment without speaking. Then she reached out and touched the edge of the plate with 2 fingers, lightly, the way you touch something you want to make sure is real. Ironquill, she said. I looked at her. Dad mentioned it, she said. He said someone called you that in the hallway. He said it like he didn't understand it but thought I might. I hadn't known Marcus had heard that. Raymond's voice had been quiet, but hallways carry. I looked at my daughter standing in front of the door with my name on it. 19 years old, her mother's eyes, and her father's posture, and her own particular quality of attention that belonged entirely to herself. And I thought about Aurelio Vega's 3 sentences on a card I have kept for 12 years. And I thought about a windowless room at Fort Belvoir and 31 degrees outside and a pen in my hand. It's a call sign, I said. I'll explain it properly when we're inside. I unlocked the door. Raymond was there. I hadn't known he would be. He had let himself in with the access code Linda had given him years ago. A thing we both pretended was not a standing arrangement. He was sitting in the chair across from my desk with a paper cup of vending machine coffee, reading something. He looked up when we came in. He saw Danny. He stood. He was 74 years old, and he stood the way men of his generation stand when someone they have been waiting to meet finally walks into the room. Colonel Hayes, I said. This is my daughter, Danny. He extended his hand. Your mother, he said to her, is the finest attorney I have encountered in 40 years of this work, and I want you to hear that from someone who was there when it cost her something to be. Danny shook his hand. She looked at me. I looked back at her. Outside the window, the courtyard lights were coming on one by one in the early evening dark, and the building settled around us with the particular quiet of a place that has held many difficult things and is still standing. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after the hearing, not an email. A letter. handwritten on plain white paper in an envelope addressed to my office with my full rank and name spelled correctly, which told me he had looked it up rather than gone from memory. The handwriting was Marcus's. I recognized it immediately, the particular forward lean of it, the way he formed his lowercase g's, unchanged in 30 years. Linda brought it in with the morning correspondence and set it on my desk without comment. She had seen the return address. She said nothing. That is Linda Chow in its entirety. I set it aside. I got through the morning's work first. 2 briefs to review, a call with the staff judge advocate's office about a separate matter that had been pending for 6 weeks, a check-in with Captain Polk on the Hartley timeline. The Hartley matter was in recess pending a ruling on an evidentiary question. Standard procedure. Nothing urgent. Marcus had filed his submissions on time and without procedural irregularity. Whatever was happening between us as people, whatever room that occupied in both our lives, it had not entered the courtroom. I respected that. I did not say so to anyone, but I noted it. At 12:15 I ate lunch at my desk. A sandwich from the place on the corner that Polk keeps a menu for in the break room. I read a deposition summary. I drank water. At 12:47 I picked up the letter. I opened it. It was 2 pages. I will not read it to you word for word. It was not written for anyone but me, and some things are entitled to remain that way even after everything else has become visible. But I will tell you its shape, because its shape is the part that matters. He began by saying he was not writing to excuse himself. He said he had spent 3 weeks trying to find a version of this letter that did that, and every version he wrote felt like a legal brief, structured, arguable, designed to produce a specific outcome, and he had finally understood that what he needed to write was not a brief, but something else. And he was not sure he knew how. He said he had known, after the second lunch with Hargrove, what was happening. He used those words. He did not qualify them or soften the edges. He said he had known, and he had told himself a version of the story in which his participation was passive, incidental, the kind of thing that powerful institutions do to ordinary people, and ordinary people cannot prevent. He said he had believed that version long enough to act on it. He said he had stopped believing it sometime around the moment he received his divorce papers and found that the line he had been standing on the correct side of had, without his noticing, shifted beneath him. He said he had not known, until that Tuesday in the hallway, that I had known. That I had known and chosen not to say it. He said that had stayed with him more than anything else. Not what he had done, but what I had not done in response to it. He said he was trying to understand what that meant about me, and what it meant about him, and he had not finished understanding either thing. He wrote about Danny. He said she had called him after her visit to the courthouse. That she had been calm and careful in the way she was when she was managing something complex, which she did, he wrote, exactly the way I do. He said she had asked him one question, whether he was proud of himself. He said he had told her he was working on an honest answer to that question. He said she had told him to take his time. He said he was proud of me. He said he had always been proud of me, and that the pride had coexisted, in ways he had not examined carefully enough, with other things that had worked against it. He said he understood now that what I had done in that room at Fort Belvoir, what I had signed and what I had refused to sign, was the most important thing either of us had done in the years we shared a life, and that he had been on the wrong side of it. He did not ask for forgiveness. I noticed that. He said he was not sure he had standing to ask for it, which was, and I say this with the dispassion of someone who has read a great many legal documents, the most legally precise thing Marcus Reed has ever written. He signed it with his first name only. I sat with the letter for a while. Then I drove home. I changed out of my jacket. I stood at the kitchen window with a glass of water. Outside, the neighbor's dog was doing its evening patrol of the yard next door, methodical and unhurried, checking the same perimeter it checks evening with undiminished interest. The sky was the particular color it gets in November at 5 o'clock. Not dark yet, but deciding to be, the light going amber, and then gray at the edges. I thought about Aurelio Vega. I thought about a 22-year-old from Laredo, Texas, and a card with 3 sentences, and the 12 years between that card and this letter, and what had been built in that time, and what had been lost, and what, it turned out, had simply been waiting. I put the letter in the drawer with Marcus's business card. I did not respond to it. Not then. What I did instead was call Danny. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom." "Hey, baby." I leaned against the counter. "I got the letter, I know." "He told me he sent it. He told you?" "He's been." She paused. "He's been more honest lately. It's weird. It's good, I think. Mostly good." I looked out the window at the dog next door finishing its patrol and settling by the fence with the satisfaction of a job adequately done. "Danny," I said, "I need to tell you something about forgiveness." "Okay, it doesn't require the other person to have earned it," I said. "It doesn't require them to be sure enough, or to have suffered proportionally, or to have said exactly the right things in exactly the right order. It's not a transaction. It's a decision you make about what you're going to carry forward and what you're going to leave where it is." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you telling me this because of Dad?" she asked. "I'm telling you this," I said, "because you're going to be a lawyer. And you're going to spend your life in rooms where people are trying to make forgiveness into a transaction. And I need you to know the difference before you get there." She thought about that. "Did you forgive him?" she asked. I looked at the amber sky going gray at the edges. "I'm working on an honest answer to that question," I said. She laughed. It was a short, surprised laugh, the kind that arrives before you've decided to let it. "Okay, Mom," she said. "Okay, baby," I said. A year is a long time, and not very long at all. That is something I have come to understand in the way you understand things that cannot be taught directly, but only lived into. The way you understand what cold feels like, or what it means to lose someone, or what it costs to sign your name to something hard. You cannot learn it from a description. You have to be inside it, moving through it. And then one day you are on the other side and you look back and you can see the shape of the thing you moved through. And you understand it the way you can only understand a room after you have left it. It is November again. I am sitting at my kitchen table with coffee that is still hot, which means I remembered the coffee pot this morning, which happens more often now than it used to. Outside the window, the yard is doing what yards in Maryland do in November, going spare and honest, the trees emptied out, the grass the color of old paper, everything simplified down to its actual structure. I find I like this time of year more than I used to. There is something clarifying about the world removing its ornamentation. Danny left for school 2 hours ago. She comes home most weekends now, which is a choice she made without my asking, and which I accept without making too much of it. Because she is 19, and will not always want to come home most weekends, and I understand that the right response to a gift freely given is to receive it without clutching. She is in her first year at the University of Maryland School of Law. She called me from her first day of contracts. She said the professor had asked the class why they were there. Not procedurally, but actually, why law? She said she had not raised her hand. She said she had written her answer on the back of her syllabus instead. Because the law either serves power or checks it, and the difference comes down to who is willing to sign their name to something hard. She sent me a photograph of it. I have it on my refrigerator. The Hartley matter resolved in February. I will not discuss the specifics. They are a matter of public record for anyone who wants to find them, and the parts that are not public record are not mine to discuss. What I will say is that the proceeding was conducted with the rigor it required, that the outcome reflected the evidence as it existed, and that Marcus Reed represented his client with the competence and professionalism that I had, despite everything expected of him. He and I did not speak outside the courtroom from January through the end of the trial. We communicated through Captain Polk and through the standard mechanisms of opposing counsel correspondence. It was correct and efficient, and occasionally, in the way that correct and efficient things occasionally are, almost peaceful. In April, he sent a second letter, shorter than the first, 3 paragraphs. The third paragraph said only, "I hope you're well, Shelby. I think you are. I think you have been for a long time in ways I didn't understand when I was close enough to see." I wrote back 2 sentences. I will not tell you what they said, but I will tell you that writing them did not feel the way I had expected it to feel for 12 years. It felt smaller than that and cleaner than that. It felt like setting something down on a shelf and being able to walk away from it. Raymond Hayes came by the office last week. He brought terrible coffee from the vending machine and sat in his chair and talked for an hour about a case he had consulted on in 1987 that had certain structural similarities to a matter Captain Polk was currently building, and the advice was genuinely useful. And afterward we sat quietly for a while the way we do, 2 people who have been in the same institution long enough to be comfortable with its particular silences. Before he left, he said, "You know Jerome called you Ironquill again last week. In front of the new lieutenant. The way you said it to him 3 years ago." "I heard," I said. "It's becoming something," he said. "A thing people say. People say a lot of things. This one they mean." He put on his coat. "You going to tell Danny what it actually means?" I told her a version. "There's a real version?" I looked at him. "The official version," I said, "is that Polk started calling me that because my signature on a prosecution brief never wavered, that the quill was always steady, and the real version?" I looked at the window. The courtyard below was bare and bright, the November light coming in flat and clear, the kind of light that doesn't flatter anything but illuminates everything. "The quill moves truest," I said, "when the hand has nothing left to lose." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "That's better," he said. "It's what I figured out eventually. Most people don't. Most people don't have Aurelio Vega sending them a card," I said. He nodded once. Then he left. I sat at my desk for a while after, not thinking. Exactly. Just being in the room that has my name on the door, in the building I have driven to for 4 years, in the institution I have given 23 years to, and will give more. Outside the window, the courtyard was doing its November thing, bare and honest and simplified down to structure. And I found, as I find most mornings now, that I did not need it to be anything other than what it was. If you are watching this, if you have stayed with me through all of it, the hallway and the letter and the November light and the things that cost what they cost, then you already understand something that I spent a long time learning. Dignity is not given to you. It is not conferred by rank or title or the nameplate on a door, though all of those things are real and they matter, and I do not pretend otherwise. Dignity is what remains when everything that can be taken has been taken, and you discover that the core of you is still there, still standing, still willing to pick up the pen. That is the only version of the story I know how to tell you. And if somewhere in it you recognize something, a choice you made, a cost you paid, a room you stood in alone at 11 o'clock at night with a decision in front of you, then I hope you signed it. I hope you signed it and walked away and built the life that came after. The world keeps moving anyway. You might as well move with it intact. Drop your country and your local time in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone who signed their name to something hard, someone who carried themselves with a quiet dignity the world didn't always see, share it with them. They'll know why.